Welcome to My Key Films, where I ride, hike, and build bikes, or at least try to. I studied film at UT and NYU and worked in the industry. Watch me struggle so you don't have to. Last time I installed the SRAM Maven brakes, and now it's time for a jam-packed build session. Today we're tackling the BSA Bottom Bracket, OneUp Bash Guide, Sigeyi Power Meter with XO1 Cranks, rear wheel with axle, X01 AXS Derailleur, and chain sizing, and of course, I'll struggle through getting the derailleur paired and dialed in. Before we get started, here's what you'll need: a SRAM dub BSA bottom bracket, a 4.5mm dub spacer, a bottom bracket tool, a torque wrench, grease or anti-seize, and a clean rag and gloves. Now if you're wondering, wait, what's the difference between a regular BSA bottom bracket and a dub one? Good question. A regular BSA bottom bracket is just a fancy way of saying it screws into your bike and works with different crank sizes, like 24mm or 30mm spindles. But SRAM had to be special, so they made dub, which only fits their 28.99mm spindle, because why make it simple, right? Bottom brackets also come in different widths, like 68mm or 73mm for most mountain bikes. So if you're running a dub crank, make sure you get a dub BSA bottom bracket, or you'll be wondering why your cranks won't fit. The cranks I'm installing are 170mm XO1 cranks, but I'm also adding a Sigeyi Power Meter with a 32-tooth chain ring, because why not make my life more complicated? A Sigeyi Power Meter is a spider-based power meter that measures how much wattage my legs are actually putting out, so I can see in real time just how weak I am. It's super lightweight, accurate, and a great way to track progress or justify why I'm so tired after a ride. Plus, adding it to my XO1 Cranks lets me keep the drivetrain I love while getting all that fancy power data, so I can scientifically prove that I deserve a snack break. If you're wondering what app I use to track my power, heart rate, speed, and other data, it's the Cadence app. It's only $40 a year, which is way cheaper than a Garmin computer, and I get to use my phone instead of spending a fortune on another gadget. I'll probably do a video on how cool it is in the future, so if that sounds interesting, leave a comment, because knowing my power output is one thing, but knowing people actually want to hear about it is another. I got this special axle from the Robert Axle project so I can mount my mountain bike onto a Wahoo kicker trainer, basically turning it into a stationary suffer machine. The kicker adjusts resistance to match the terrain in Zwift, a virtual cycling app where I can pretend I'm riding epic trails while actually sweating in my basement. So now I can suffer indoors just as much as I do outside, minus the dirt and sketchy line choices. In the future, I'll possibly do a more in-depth YouTube of my MTB kicker Zwift setup. The axle is 160mm to 172mm with a 1mm thread pitch, which is compatible with the UDH hanger. And if you're wondering, UDH stands for Universal Derailleur Hanger, a standardized hanger designed from SRAM that makes swapping or replacing hangers way easier. Basically, it helps keep my derailleur aligned and shifting smooth, whether I'm riding outside or spinning away indoors. The derailleur I'm installing is the SRAM X01 AXS wireless derailleur with the AXS pod rocker controller, which means no cables, no housing, no headaches. Unlike a wired derailleur, there's no cable stretch, no gunk buildup, and shifting stays precise and consistent. Plus, it connects to the SRAM AXS app, so I can customize my shift settings and check battery life, because nothing's worse than a dead derailleur mid-ride. Basically, it's smoother, cleaner, and just makes life easier. Or does it? Cable derailleurs don't need batteries, they're cheaper, and if something goes wrong, you can usually fix it on the trail. So while AXS is high-tech and convenient, some riders prefer the simplicity and reliability of a good old-fashioned cable. So far, I'm happy with wireless shifting. To size and install the chain, you'll need a compatible SRAM X01 chain, a chain breaker tool, and the SRAM B-gap adjustment tool, which luckily comes with your XO1 derailleur. For adjustments, you'll need a 3mm hex wrench to mount the derailleur, a 4mm hex wrench for the limit and B-tension screws, and a T25 torque wrench to secure the derailleur to the hanger. Sounds easy, right? Well, let's just say getting it buttery smooth might take a few dozen micro adjustments. Get comfy and grab some popcorn, because installing all these parts and dialing in this derailleur might just make me quit being a DIY mountain bike mechanic forever. First, make sure your bottom bracket shell is clean. Use a degreaser and a clean rag to wipe down the threads if necessary. Apply a thin layer of grease or anti-seize to the threads of the bottom bracket shell. This helps prevent creaking and makes future removal easier. Start by threading in the drive side cup, the side with the chain ring. Hand tighten it in a counterclockwise direction since it's reverse threaded on BSA bottom brackets. Using your bottom bracket tool and a torque wrench, tighten each cup to 35 to 50 Newton meters, depending on SRAM's specifications. Be sure not to over-tighten, as this can damage the threads or the bottom bracket itself. Next, apply a thin layer of grease to the non-drive side threading and bottom bracket. Install the non-drive side cup by threading it in clockwise. Again, hand tighten it to avoid cross-threading. Once it's screwed on smoothly, use the torque wrench to tighten to 40 Newton meters. Now that the SRAM BSA bottom bracket is installed, let's talk about spacers, specifically the 4.5mm dub spacer. The Stumpjumper EVO has a 73mm BSA threaded bottom bracket shell, which means you'll typically need one 4.5mm spacer on the drive side when using a SRAM dub crank set. This ensures the correct chain line and bearing preload. To install the spacer, simply pop it onto the drive side spindle before installing the crank set. This spacer sits between the bottom bracket cup and the crank arm, ensuring the crankset is properly aligned with the chainring in the correct position. Before installing the cranks, mount the OneUp Components Bash guide to protect the chainring. Align the backplate with the ISCG05 tabs, place the black washer between the frame and bash guide, and loosely install the bolts with a 4mm hex wrench. Repeat for the other two screws. Later, remove the blue chain guide to install the drive side crank, then torque the bolts to 5 Newton meters. Now we will install the Sigeyi Power Meter. First, use a T25 torque wrench to loosen and remove the chainring bolts from the XO1 chainring. Next, align the Sigeyi Spider Power Meter onto the crank spindle, making sure the mounting interface lines up correctly and tighten to between 6 to 8 Newton meters. Now place your 32 tooth chainring onto the spider, ensuring proper orientation with the bolt holes. Secure the chainring using the included bolts, tightening them in a star pattern to SRAM's recommended torque, usually 6 to 8 Newton meters. Double check that the chainring sits flush with the power meter for accurate readings. First, install the non-drive side XO1 crank by applying a light coat of grease to its interface and sliding it onto the spindle. Before you install the drive side crank, remove the blue chain guide. Next, install the drive side crank. Align it to mate perfectly with the non-drive side. Tighten it with an 8mm hex wrench, then reinstall the chain guide. Use a torque wrench to torque the crank to 54 Newton meters. Before hitting the trails, pair the Sigeyi Power Meter to your cycling computer or app via Bluetooth or ANT+. Perform a zero offset calibration for the most accurate power readings. Pairing the derailleur with the pod rocker controller. Install a charged battery, hold the derailleur's pairing button until the LED blinks, then press the pod rocker's pairing button. When the LED turns solid, press the derailleur button. Now you're paired. For micro adjustments, hold the pod rocker button until it turns solid green, then use the paddles to fine-tune. Adjustments are small but precise. Release the button to return to normal shifting. Let's install the UDH hanger. First, locate the derailleur mounting area on your frame and align the hanger with the mounting tabs. Secure it without grease using the provided bolts and a 4mm hex wrench by tightening counterclockwise, then torque the bolt to 25 Newton meters until it's snug and flush. And just like that, your derailleur has a solid home. Now you're ready to shift like a pro. To mount the XO1 derailleur onto the UDH hanger, first lightly grease the threads, then align the derailleur with the hanger and loosely secure it using a 3mm hex wrench. Then, torque to 8 to 10 Newton meters. Your derailleur is now firmly in place and ready for fine-tuning. Next, we'll install the AXS pod rocker controller. Before that, ensure the SRAM AXS bridge clamp is in place, which I've already installed, as it allows for more controller adjustments. To install the pod rocker, loosen the T25 bolt on the bridge clamp, slide in the controller aligning it with the triangle shape, then tighten the T25 bolt to 2 Newton meters. Now we'll install the rear wheel and axle. First, remove the wedge from the rear caliper and grease the axle threads. Mount the rear wheel, ensuring the rotors are in the caliper. Finally, slide in the axle and tighten it with a 5mm hex wrench. You want to torque the axle between 12 to 15 Newton meters. On the drive side of the axle, screw in the silver trainer component for attaching to the Wahoo trainer. I swapped the stock bolt for a longer one for extra security and added a rubber washer to protect the UDH bolt from scratches. Finally, tighten the screw to 2 to 5 Newton meters. Now we can finally test the rear brakes. So far they're working great. Before we size and install the chain, we need to release the air from the shock and secure it with this orange strap to simulate full compression. That way we'll size the chain correctly and avoid any surprises later on. To size the chain, wrap it around the 32 tooth chainring and the largest cog on the XO1 cassette, bypassing the derailleur. Pull the chain tight and add 2 full links, one inner and one outer pair. Cut the chain using a chain breaker, ensuring it ends with inner links for the master link. To thread the chain easily, press the derailleur button and gently spread the cage until it locks open. Next, thread the chain through the derailleur pulleys, making sure it follows the correct path. Connect the master link. Make sure that the arrow on the link points in the direction of chain movement. Align the chain ends and insert the master link until the pins snap together. Before locking the master link, release the derailleur button so it snaps closed, then rotate the cranks until the master link sits at the top between the cassette and chainring. Then, with one hand holding the rear tire firmly, press down quickly on the crank to lock the master link securely. Now let's set up the XO1 AXS Derailleur. As you can see, it's totally out of whack since nothing's been adjusted yet. Get ready to watch me lose my mind dialing it in. Sure, it only takes me 2 hours, but thanks to the magic of editing, you'll only see a couple minutes of madness. I learned to set up this derailleur by watching the official SRAM AXS video. Link below. Here is a major tip that I wish I would have done before following along with the SRAM video. First, set up the SRAM AXS app and configure your pod rocker paddles. I wanted the top paddle to downshift to the easiest gear and the bottom paddle to upshift to the hardest gear. By default, the paddles were set up backwards, and my monkey brain got totally confused when trying to dial in the derailleur. So to set up the XO1 AXS derailleur, follow these steps in this order. Set up the SRAM AXS app and configure your pod rocker paddles, adjust B tension, set the low limit, set the high limit, and finally micro adjust shifting. To adjust the B tension, you want to shift the chain into the second largest cog. Then you want to place the new SRAM B gap tool on the cog. You want the little triangle to align to the center of the jockey wheel screw. To do this, you need to tighten the B tension screw, which is the screw behind the battery. As you tighten the screw, the jockey will align with the triangle like so. Now we will adjust the low limit and the high limit. A great way to remember which is the low limit and which is the high limit is to think about the cassette as a pyramid. Lowest part of the pyramid is the low limit, or largest cog, and the highest part of the pyramid is the high limit, or smaller cog. The screws are kind of opposite of what you would think. The inner screw is for the high limit, and the outer screw is for the low limit. To set the low limit, shift to the largest cog. Then you want to tighten the screw so that it barely touches the outer link of the derailleur, then back the screw out 1/4 turn. You want to position the derailleur so the jockey wheel sits directly under the cog without overshifting into the spokes. This is easier said than done, as I either had the chain overshifting into the spokes or undershifting into the easiest gear. Now we will set the high limit. Shift to the smallest gear. Adjust the high limit screw until it lightly touches the link of the derailleur, then back the screw out 1/4 turn. You want to adjust the high limit screw so the jockey wheel is aligned properly without shifting past the last gear. And this is where my descent into madness began. Obsessing over the low and high limit screws, chasing that mythical perfect shift. Hours passed. My patience wore thin. My main camera gave up on life, and I was left with only blurry 360 footage, like a deranged scientist documenting his own downfall. But I pressed on because I had to.
That doesn't sound good.
What followed was a true test of patience and sanity. The shifting was clunky, the gears grinded, and the chain jammed more times than I'd like to admit. I turned the high limit screw, then the low limit screw, then back again, over and over, chasing the perfect shift like some kind of deranged madman. Every small adjustment felt like progress, until the derailleur mocked me with another misshift. At this point, I was convinced the bike had a mind of its own, and its only goal was to break me before I fixed it. Just when I thought I had entered a shifting purgatory, endlessly turning limit screws in a desperate quest for smoothness, a glimmer of hope emerged. Micro adjustments. Ah yes, the mystical fine-tuning SRAM so graciously provides a last-ditch effort before I completely lost my grip on reality. To micro adjust, you hold the AXS button on the controller until the LED blinks, then shift up or down to move the derailleur in tiny 0.2mm increments. And let me tell you, these microscopic adjustments felt like surgery on a stubborn robot. One click too far, and the derailleur had a meltdown. One click too little, and it mocked me with hesitation. But slowly, shift by shift, the grinding eased, the clunking faded, and dare I say, I was winning this battle. Or at least I was losing slightly less. After what felt like an eternity of tweaking, adjusting, and questioning my life choices, I finally got it shifting decently. Listen to the pure exhaustion in my voice as I accept this small victory. After a lot of trial and error, I finally got it to shift pretty decent. I wish I could get it better, but this is the best I could do, so let's see how it goes. It's not as smooth as I'd like, and shifting into first gear is a bit clunky, but after a few rides and some micro adjustments, it dials in much better. With that, the drivetrain install is done. Still here? Sweet. Next, I'm wrapping up the dream build with a dropper post, Hustle Lab REM tech pedals, and suspension setup. Meanwhile, check out my SRAM Maven brake install, because stopping matters, or my Fox 36 Factory Grip X fork install for buttery suspension. Both have solid tips and some mild suffering. And if you're feeling generous, buy me a coffee. Actually, make it a pizza. Link in the description.